Good afternoon. So my name's Bofkin. I'm a co-founder and I run day-to-day a company, an organisation called Global Street Art. I'll give you a little bit about my history and background. I have a split background. On the one hand, I used to break dance for the UK, which was about 10 years or so ago. And on the other hand, I was also a scientist. I have a PhD in maths and evolution. I was attracted to stuff relating to kind of maths and classifying. After a few different job changes, I found myself in Spain, and after a breakdancing injury, I found myself unable to dance. So I started applying all of that energy into photographing street art and graffiti around the world a good few years ago. And especially living in Spain, I ended up taking 10,000 photos there and 60,000 photos total. And then classifying them. And I'm still not really sure what compelled me to do that. But it was quite a lot of fun at the time, learning about street art through looking at lots of it, classifying things by artist, technique, location, and all sorts of other things. And the more I did that, the more you could kind of pull out really silly patterns in the data and look at things like smoking monkeys as a trend around the world. And it was quite fun. And that became a core part of what Global Street Art is. So Global Street Art, I co-founded with my business partner in early 2012. And we're three things now, really. We're the largest online street art photo archive, about 160,000 fans on social media. And it's a platform where artists upload their work and we share it with our fans and drive them new fans. That platform extends into the real world. And I'll talk about our walls project quite a lot later in this talk. But since 2012, we organised over 750 legal walls in London. Basically, when I got back to London, there were so many other people taking photos that it didn't really feel so useful anymore. So just on my bike route on the way to work, just started jumping off and asking politely for permission from my friends to paint walls. The third side of Global Street Art is we have an agency side. We do, and I make no bones about it, hand-painted advertising, and it is advertising, and also things like commercial interiors. One of the interiors we just finished, which is quite funny, this is actually based on the South Bank skate park. It was a series of 15 murals for a property developer that was quite funny, painting in a kind of realistic fashion part of the location where we were yesterday. And we also do events as well. So we did a live projected art battle supported by a tablet maker, Wacom, about a month ago. I'm quite interested personally in the combination of art and technology. So to just give, in a slightly different, I'm not going to give a particular history of graffiti, we talked about that at length, but when writers were painting on trains, the train at the time actually had a function that's quite akin to the internet today. So it was a way of having your message spread further and being seen by people in other parts of the city before digital photography, and when most people were kind of excluded from getting photos of their own work. So the internet and technology has changed enormously in the last few years, and people share a lot of the art that they like. And what that means is I think most of the art that we see, the street art that we see actually, is often online and probably not on the street. But people have a propensity to share the things that they like the most. And I think the quality of what gets shared online is possibly higher than some of the things that we see on the street. And that's, I think, been quite helpful in showing people what's possible in street art and kind of how good this sort of art form can be. Yeah, we've talked about this thing a few times, that when you use either or the word street art or graffiti, you're talking about an art form, a crime, a subculture, all rolled into one, perhaps manifested separately, depending on the semantics of how you define the word. But I think what's quite important is there's a lot of opportunities now, which is why we're here today, where things about the art form side of it are expressed more and more, or can be expressed more without the crime. But of course the crime hasn't gone away, it's still there as well. There's three major trends that I'll whiz you through very quickly that I think have been instrumental in changing the environment for street art in the last 5 or 10 years, certainly. Two of them we talked about in our book, which came out last month. Apologies, there's none on the table right now, but we'll bring some tomorrow. But those trends are a trend in the art form itself, a trend in what's happened to public space, and also whether you like it or not, there's been trends in things, the industry around street art, and there is one, and advertising and how that's affected as well. So graffiti in the artistic sense, not in the crime sense, the art form has changed massively, has really developed in the last sort of 5-10 years, and sort of progressively over the last 50 years. And there's some really beautiful technical stuff, and it's much more refined, there's much more tools around now. style is still there, and I know Jay will probably have opinions about how good style was then, and was indeed, but there's a lot of progression in the art form itself now. Street art, a lot of us, I think everyone here is sort of well aware that, you know, we used to think about it just as, it was just sort of stencils. That's changed enormously, and just about any technique you can imagine can be used for street art. There's no restriction in materials. In fact, you can throw in the kitchen sink or, in fact, the kitchen sieve. There's just no barrier to what technique or material you can use. And that explosion in creativity and the fact it's been taken outside, I find is quite important. Now, street art is really a bit of a made-up, cobbled word, and it encompasses lots of different aesthetic trends and identities and people painting different things. The next few photos I'm going to show are all what we might call street art or some graffiti, but they're all this kind of genre of stuff that we're here talking about mostly today. But they're all vastly different, and their influences are as much about reinterpreting past masters to producing really, you know, ornate, detailed kind of works of 3D. To things like illusion and anamorphism. This is painted on a corner, so it, you know, as you trom away, it jumps out at you. But street art also, writ large, includes things like photorealism and font-based work and things like calligraphy and also, you know, abstraction. And we're calling all of this street art, but actually, in terms of an art form, it's quite mature with a lot of different threads happening in it. We're kind of, as you expect, defining it retrospectively. One of the differences between street art and gallery-based art is obviously the context. And the context has important impacts on how the art form manifests. So, you know, it can really be sensitive that there's already a mark on the canvas. So what the art form can do is have a conversation, a better conversation, or an important conversation with the city and the environment around it. And often people really enjoy seeing this kind of playfulness and this kind of interaction, turning spaces into faces. And, you know, a canvas is quite flat, but walls aren't. And street art is quite powerful at using irregular shaped walls and doing kind of creative things with it. And it doesn't have to just be walls, it can also be things like, you know, bridges and cars and all of that sort of stuff. So that's trend one, the art form itself and how that's changed. Trend two I mentioned was what's happened in public space. Now 10 years ago, street art festivals as we know them didn't really exist. There was maybe one graffiti festival internationally called Meeting of Styles. New art, you saw Doc Master Leon talking about before, really started around 2006. That's a major new trend. What we started noticing about 2 or 3 years ago is there weren't that many festivals, but they shot up really quickly, and the organisation behind them got better, and local interest groups wanted this to happen. Artists was getting better organised, and non-artists were also being involved that just saw how cool this was and wanted to be able to bring it to different spaces. So these are just some examples of projects just within the UK. To be honest, globally, we lost track of the number of festivals that were even getting in touch with us quite a long time ago now. So it's a really lovely trend in public space that people are taking on themselves, like Ingrid, to organise things as sort of art at big scale. So this is the side of an abandoned ship in Wales, which, you know, it doesn't sail, it doesn't go anywhere, it's stuck there. So it's crap as a ship, but it's brilliant as a canvas. And that's what street art is really good at doing. Street art can be potentially a low-cost tool for urban regeneration because it's a very powerful way of changing how people feel about being in a certain space. This is Nelson Street, part of the festival See No Evil, which was really a neglected street in Bristol, but as the street art kind of went up, or the murals went up anyway, it's become a lot more, well, tour buses have redirected their route through that street. It's become a tourist attraction, one of the busiest streets in Bristol. But there's plenty of other places within the UK. I think this is Chichester, this is in Cardiff, and then I mentioned we have our own walls project in London, and actually that's a piece that we did with, organised with the Liche, painted a couple of years ago now, which is sadly no longer with us. So that's one of the major public space trends. And then the third trend is in advertising. Frankly, billboards suck. They're generally not very attractive, they're a bit of a blight. And we have a bit more of an affection for things like hand-painted advertising typically, but it depends on the images and what it's trying to essentially force upon us. I don't think street art and advertising are two very different things. And I'm not claiming that the next slides are street art, they're not. But what they're doing is using some of the techniques from street art and certainly some of the skills to do things that, whether or not they're advertising, and this is advertising, but I think can make more of a contribution to public space, if some contribution at all, certainly than traditional billboard force of advertising, which I think is far more detrimental. So I'm not saying this is necessarily good, but I'm definitely saying I think it's better. So this was an 80-metre long wall we painted for a client in Hackney Wick on the Olympic site. And the theme is based around inventors, British inventors, but instead of painting simple portraits, we smashed them, we fractured them in some way, and I really do quite like the results. This was a project for a Brazilian cancer hospital, and it was a breast cancer awareness project where we painted 5 walls in 5 cities, including in Sydney, with an artist called Days, who was actually one of the artists in one of Cameron's slides before. But it's quite a powerful way of doing it, and it's really just sort of a skillful use of images. So thinking about the kind of better spaces, I think it's pretty obvious to say that most folks are here with at least one thing in common, which is we want to live in better cities. Now, we define better differently, so I think it would help to be able to identify practices and models on which there's a general consensus from people of which things could be better. Now, it goes without saying that we believe that greater access to painting in public, for artists to paint in public spaces would be better. We believe that the general public also wants more good art in their public spaces. And I think we appreciate that authorities would often like this to happen as well, but are unsure how to approach the situation. I'm going to dismiss something, I mean, quite simply, do more people think art is better? It's quite nice to have some statistics and figures behind it, and one of the things that I think we really struggle with today, with reference to street art and how that's sort of changing, is demonstrating to people with numbers what people think about this. Is it better? How much better is it? How much more do people want to go to that space? And that's quite challenging to do. So in July, we ran a project with Londonists, which is a big London blog, nominate your neighbourhood for a street art festival. And the logic behind that was most of what we paint is in Shoreditch. And right now, as I'll show you soon, we're painting an awful lot of building site hoardings. We're looking after them, and lots of artists can kind of paint there. If we're painting building site hoardings in Shoreditch, in 2 years we're painting nothing. So I think it's quite important that street art moves into different parts, moves into more parts of the city. But it shouldn't be an art of the rich or the poor. We'd quite like to see more everywhere. So let's let neighbourhoods kind of choose themselves. And of the 7 as a result of that competition, 7 neighbourhoods came forward and entered. Locally interested groups said, we want a street art festival, or we want more street art, we want more murals. Brockley, 2 places in Walthamstow, Streatham, Baden, Poplar, and Stoke Newington. This then went to a public vote. There were 3,500 votes in total, which is not to be sniffed at, and Brockley won with 900 votes. So we're now committed to helping a local group there organise a street art festival that takes place at the last week of May and the start of June next year. A second example, which is a really nice one, this only happened last week. So through a partner that we work with, Forest Recycling Project, who pick up excess paint from industry and decorators and then sell it on very cheaply. We entered together this project called Colour the Capital for an ITV competition, and we won. This project won £50,000, and as a result of that, we're committed to painting 9 new murals, 3 in Tower Hamlets, 3 in Hackney, 3 in Waltham Forest next year. We're giving workshops in 6 schools, and then we're giving away 6,000 litres of paint through Forest Recycling Project to low-income families so they can improve their own spaces. Because I think there's definitely an idea of sort of empowerment. Now, I haven't got the number of votes exactly that went for this, but judging on how it worked last year, we would have probably got about 60,000 votes. And we went head-to-head with another competition which was about cycle safety in children, and really with the aim of saving kids' lives through teaching them cycle safety. And the idea that enough people say, actually, we want a bit more paint on our walls, and we're going to vote for that above something which is life and death for some number of kids, is kind of powerful. And I'm not even saying I necessarily agree with that. I think they've got a really great mission as well, but nevertheless, that was kind of how the vote turned out. So there's many interested local groups throughout London, indeed throughout the world. We'd like to empower them and help them to paint spaces, connect them with great street artists, help them meet their local artists that are often living sort of amongst them in their own neighbourhood that maybe they don't know. And so I'd like to spend the rest of the talk going through is our walls project, which I mentioned before. So we've organised over 750 now legal murals, everything you can see in the top picture, so some pretty large ones. That was a car park that's largely being demolished now in East London, in Shoreditch. with lots of different artists from all over the world. From left to right, it's Circle from LA, Run and Never 2501 from Italy, Mysterious Owl that is the green Frankenstein face. You know, he's English but lives in Australia, and then Australian Roan, he did the lady's face, and there's a couple of bits bottom right. Also, Miss Faith 47 from South Africa, she's in there too. But there's this really international community of artists that often travel to London looking for wall spaces, so we try and provide that and open new spaces at the same time. We did a project, the first time we did it was last year, and we painted again this year, but the walls at the bottom of the South Bank Centre was a really nice space, and in that year, particularly, for good reason, we wanted all UK artists just as a demonstration of local and national talent, and they're all really awesome. I was really happy with how that turned out. And to quote Paul Denton from the South Bank Centre, the effect of that project was turning a thoroughfare into a destination site. So that's the idea that if you paint something, you kind of arrest motion, you encourage people to stop, and that also helps communities to coalesce and interactions to happen as well. So I think what we're trying to do is say, can we do better than this around the city? You know, that's valid as well. Is there something that's generally agreed on as better? And can it be challenged as well? And I'll go into that in a second. And I'm sure as how we can do better than this, the buff, which is really ugly. So I'm going to focus bits of our walls project on what we do, but I'll focus on a specific space. So we're currently looking after, trying to look after, but it always has a life of its own. 2 city blocks worth of hoardings around East London. We're currently responsible for over half the street art in the Brick Lane area, and this is probably the biggest or second biggest street art site in London. It's 2 city blocks, like I mentioned, on Great Eastern Street. But when you go there, there's a few sort of governing principles. You won't see global street art on the wall anywhere. In fact, we didn't talk about it. A lot of folks wouldn't know. There's this prevalent view that culture needs no assistance. No, it doesn't. It doesn't need any assistance. But if you can help take some of the administrative burden away, you can surely contribute something. Our walls project works in some pretty simple ways. I'll just walk you around this site for a second. So this is one of the aspects of the hoardings. This is the second aspect. It's another street. This is the main face viewed from Great Eastern Street. That was it when it was London Live filmed it being painted the first time and decided to give that some coverage. And you can see our some of our murals in the background and the hoardings that we got permission for in the front. The Walls project works under a few simple principles. Every time an artist goes out, we give them a permission letter. And it looks a lot more official. My business card is stable to it than it probably is in some ways. We always have permission from the wall owner, but there's no expectation that they should sign the letter. Their name and phone number go on there, but largely my name goes on there as well, and my phone number. So there's always a feeling that should someone stop them, that there is a recourse, there is someone that you can talk to, and there is some kind of follow-up. And it's worked really well. In the 750 or so pieces, there's been no arrests. There's been one fine which got dismissed, where someone didn't believe that the letter was genuine. And there's been very sort of few problems. There's also an operating procedure. We never tell artists what they can paint. I don't agree with that at all. But if you're operating in public space, there is a sensitivity as well to, a normal sensitivity. So we simply ask that artists don't do anything that's pretty obvious. It's not racist, it's not sexist. There can be a political element to it, but it's not overtly it's not forcing it so much on people. And to be honest, that rarely comes up because by and large, that's not really what most folks kind of want to paint at the start. And one of the things we find so funny is how graffiti as an art form, the lettering side of it, is so vilified, but actually it's probably one of the least offensive visual things you could do, because it's just a bunch of letters and colours. There's nothing about that figurative subject matter that people can so easily take offence to. What I want to talk about is kind of the policy on the hoardings, because I think it's relevant to London, and I think it can frankly be expanded. We've kind of viewed those hoardings that we're looking at as something that could be taken and expanded across the city, because if you think about it, TfL probably owns about 5% of London now, but they're about 50% of the conversation usually when someone's talking about graffiti. That gives 95% of the city, and probably less than 1% of that, less than 1% of London's walls are painted. Whichever way is the best way forward, we're not sure, but we'd quite like to get from probably 0.1% of London's walls being painted to 0.2%. which probably feels like a massive change, but in the grand scheme of things, it's quite small. So if we could expand this across different building site hoardings, what would it look like? And this is an incredibly mundane photograph. It looks like a site safety sign, obviously that's what it is, but it's laminated. So when you think about a building site, you're sharing the space with the builders, and they've got certain, the construction company, and they have certain statutory requirements. The signs need to be held at eye line and they need to be protected. So they're, all right, this is the easiest way to deal with it. We're going to laminate the signs for you. So instead of us having to replace the signs every time, if they do get tagged or written on methylated spirits, just wash it off and it works quite easily. Frankly, we don't have to tell artists. Artists know what to do on the site. This was a piece that went up quite quickly. And you can see that the artists, of their own volition on the right-hand side, fixed the wall themselves. There's not much left, it's only a couple of minutes. On any given weekend or day, we're pretty much out painting. This was last weekend when over 15 artists were out with us. Now, I'm going to make a quick distinction between illegal and unauthorized. So it's the Criminal Damage Act 1971, which comes up a lot in this conference. A person is guilty of offence if they destroy or damage the property belonging to another. When a work goes up that's not authorized, it's not clear to me that it's illegal in any way, shape or form. No one asked to put this on the hoarding, and actually it's really good, and I think adds a lot to the space. Certainly adds something. So two things can happen when unauthorized or authorized work at lower quality goes up. Or we can either, so this went up a weekend or so ago, a week or so, and it wasn't the best art, it was done quite hastily. And if you're choosing where to put someone else, where they can paint it because other folks are asking, over that stuff seems like the most obvious thing you can do. So we repainted that last weekend. Does it work is the question. I'm going to read you out a couple of lines from a letter from property developers that we were painting their hoardings directly on Brick Lane last year. Just a few lines to say how happy we were with the artwork on our site hoardings. Brick Lane's notorious for graffiti. Once the artwork went up, we were surprised there was hardly any tagging of the hoarding. That saved us time and money painting over the nuisance graffiti, with the added bonus of people stopping and admiring the work and our development. So if this system works and can be applied more broadly, artists get an increased amount of space to paint. The public enjoys an increased amount of art. Councils save their resources in removing graffiti. Police can focus their attention on more serious crimes. Developers can have a way of actively contributing to their local communities. And within this city in mind, London's reputation as a cultural capital gets bolstered. That was a closing few points. London's a great city with a hard-earned reputation as a global cultural capital. For us to maintain and even improve, boost that standing as a cultural capital, I think we really have to provide safe legal spaces for local and visiting international artists. We risk, if we don't do that, falling behind cities like Łódź in Poland, which has an amazing street art festival run by Teresa, who's in the room, and many other cities besides. It's hard to meet with developers. I'll explain this last slide in a second. It's hard to, the current things that are probably the bottlenecks are meeting with the property developers, but we find when we do, they're often quite keen to be involved. There's also an administrative burdens. So the hoarding that's being painted outside today, that we were very happy to be involved in organising, required risk assessment forms, public liability insurance, a contract with UCL, and all sorts of things, and a fair procedure and a design brief. Now, that's all very doable, and it's amazing that UCL have taken that step, and it's really credit to them that they have done that. But if we can get the administrative burden from that level down a little bit, that's quite powerful. And that's why I'm showing this last slide, the penny black. Before the invention of the postage stamp, sending letters was too expensive for most people. After the invention of the postage stamp, which reduced the administrative and financial burdens of sending letters, the culture of letter writing increased greatly in the 19th and 20th centuries. So if we can remove that administrative burden from artists in finding legal spaces to paint, then we can encourage, we think, a more creative city where more artists can contribute to their spaces and more people are encouraged to become artists in themselves. Cheers.